Pay close attention to what you are about to see. These images will be seen around the world. These rats have been fed with transgenic corn during their entire life cycle. The tumors they suffer from are enormous. The study that revealed the effect of the GMOs on the health of these rats has just been completed. It benefited from exceptional financial and technical means. We were able to witness the study in its entirety. It lasted for 2 years. Following years of doubt and controversies, will we finally know the truth about GMOs? Would we then be faced with a health crisis of global proportions?
This is the longest, most thorough study to have been carried out on a GMO, and we have also carried out a joint study on the most used pesticide in the world, the Roundup, which is a herbicide. It belongs to the main pesticide category. We spent over a year trying to obtain transgenic corn because no GMO manufacturers were willing to provide them. This is because Monsanto requires contracts to be signed stipulating that the seeds must not be used for testing and an arrangement must be made prior to the testing. We wanted our study to be independent.
This is the first time that a 2-year study has been conducted on GMOs. And there lies the big difference. Furthermore, we tried to evaluate a maximum of biochemical and biological parameters with repeated blood tests, weighing of the specimens, and urine tests. We studied the hepatic and urinary parameters, as well as the blood parameters, all the parameters that can be studied. We also studied the hormonal parameters, which has never been done in previous studies. This experiment is a world premiere.
Up until now, the corn NK603, the very one selected for the study, had only been tested over a 3-month period, and that in a test environment entirely controlled by Monsanto, its manufacturer. Furthermore, concerning the Roundup, also manufactured by Monsanto and which is used for growing corn, only its active agent, glyphosate, had been assessed. But one needs to understand that the manufacturers, in order to enable the active agent to penetrate the plant cell successfully, use additives that are sometimes more harmful than the actual glyphosate.
We had 2 clear objectives. Firstly, to conduct the studies exactly according to international requirements, but making sure to be very thorough when it comes to analyzing the results. Secondly, we want to determine if there are secondary effects. The only way to do this is to carry out tests on animals and then to examine all the blood parameters whilst paying close attention to their organs.
At this stage, it might prove useful to know exactly what GMOs are used for. It is a plant that has been developed either to produce its own insecticide or to be tolerant to a herbicide, thus enabling it to be exposed to massive doses of it without dying. One can understand how GMOs could be useful to farmers. For example, they would be able to spray their entire field with Roundup, killing all the weeds in the process and never harming the genetically modified plant. On the other hand, it is hard to see the benefits for the consumer, who will effectively be ingesting substances coming from a plant that has absorbed pesticides. That is why it is crucial to test not only the GMO, but also the GMO with its residue and the pesticide on its own.
This type of testing had never been done before because the corporations doing the tests would do them on GMOs with the Roundup, which meant that we had no idea what between the GMO and the Roundup caused the pathologies, or they did them on GMOs without specifying that this was the case. So what we decided to do was to address the question, are we dealing with the effects of the GMO or the pesticide? During the last 10 years of testing, the National Commission did not envisage a pesticide effect.
Therefore, Europe does not even demand that chronicle toxicity tests be systematically carried out on animals, and when they are required, it is the manufacturers who decide the protocol to be used. For example, the Amflora potato was only tested on a group of 30 rats, 10 of which were being fed the GMO. The Monsanto corn was tested on 400 rats. 80 of them were fed the transgenic plant, but only 40 of them were then subjected to blood tests. Either way, none of these studies lasted longer than 90 days.
What is represented by this figure is that certain groups of rats, male and female, have ingested GMO corn. GMO corn with Roundup residue and Roundup on its own. Every time we go up a level, a rat dies. The limit is 10 due to the number of rats that constitute a group. The dotted line represents the females of the group who die but have a completely normal diet. Only 2 animals die spontaneously after 550 days. On the other hand, every female that has been fed on the GMO with Roundup or Roundup diet has died more frequently than the other rats. Some will challenge the relevance of such results, but what is undeniable is that in the group that has been exposed to the GMOs, there is a 600% increase, or 6 times more deaths, compared to the control group. As far as medicine or biology is concerned, there is no need for further testing.
An important fact is that all the studies carried out on the rats are done over a 3-month period. It so happens that none of the effects are visible until the 4th month. This is fundamental in understanding that studies conducted over a 3-month period are useless. This conclusion is easily understandable. It could be said that their only use is to soothe the consciences.
Every rat out of the 200 that were tested was dissected by Professor Seralini's team. They did this to discover exactly what had affected their organs. The purpose behind this was to identify the way each diet, GMO and Roundup on its own, had acted on the metabolism of each animal, focusing on the development rate of the tumors that, and this comes as no surprise, only start to manifest themselves after the initial 3-month period.
This figure represents the number of palpable tumors contracted by the animal during the experiment. Here, we can see the rats subjected to GMOs compared to those with a regular diet. As you can see, very few males have contracted tumors. This is due to them being more resistant to the testing process. What these figures show are the large tumors. Each step up represents a large tumor, which can measure 17 millimeters by 17 millimeters. For a rat, these measurements are colossal. It would equate to a tumor of this size if seen on a human being. It is enormous. After having studied these tumors, it can be said that 94% of them take effect in the mammary glands, which would equate to breast cancer in a woman. We are faced with renal tumors for the males, but not only, some males also suffer from mammary tumors. This points towards a hormonal effect that isn't affected by the dosage. 60% of breast cancer cases are caused by hormonal deficiencies.
Professor Seralini's study holds one last surprise for us, and this is a major one. Up until now, one could have thought that the main cause of death for the tested rats was coming from the pesticide added to the corn. But what the study highlighted, and this for the first time ever, is the fact that the transgenesis itself could have killed the rats. What this means is that just by interfering with the genome of the plant in order to modify it, we are faced with repercussions that no one could have anticipated. This is enough to make us reconsider all the scientific precepts that led to the creation of GMOs.
Roundup had never been tested separately. Whilst conducting cellular studies, we saw that the cells of the liver, embryos, kidneys, placenta and the umbilical cord died much faster, and so we could deduce that there was a toxic effect on the organism. What can be said is that there is an increase in deaths due to GMOs and Roundups. The biggest surprise came when we realized that GMOs without any Roundup residue were responsible for an increase in the death rate of females and of some males. This could be the result of the GMO gene that has been badly assimilated by the plant and that has therefore resulted in a negative effect or due to a secondary metabolical effect.
What that means is that we are dealing with a GMO in particular. a modification of a cereal or a GMO corn, with regard to the genes inserted in the corn to make it a GMO corn can result in different effects. It is not because a certain GMO has a particular effect that other GMOs will have an effect, but some may even have more of an impact.
What is alarming, this is the GMO that is being eaten by the Americans, but also the GMO that has been approved for importation by European agencies, including the French ones, and that obviously contaminates our food.
Nowadays, only 2 types of GMOs are being produced in a few European countries. One is corn and the other potato. But what about the 27 million tons of transgenic soya that are unloaded each year in European ports? This soya is used to feed our cattle, but it also makes its way into a number of foodstuffs.
What we want to achieve with this study is a moratorium. The situation is serious enough and we're not going to eat everything and anything. We imported without knowing what was being imported, and the United States have produced crops without knowing what they were producing. There needs to be more studies of this kind, and GMO manufacturers need to conduct them before commercializing their products.
A moratorium on growing GMOs has been approved by most European countries. Now that we know the results of the study conducted by Professor Seralini, could it be time to extend this moratorium to all the GMO used in many of our foods? To establish an undeniable scientific truth, one needs teams, time, and means. Some will say that it takes too much time and that it is too expensive. But had we taken this precaution, could we not have avoided recent sanitary scandals? Will GMOs be responsible yet again for a calamitous scenario? And while we are waiting for scientific certainties, evidently, this is a risk we cannot afford to take.
That corporations own this country. I mean, what?
The truth.
Yes.
Look, you guys.
Yeah, okay, but we talked about.
You guys work for big corporations. You are corporations, so I take that to be the truth.
Okay,
Yeah, but corporations don't.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
it's a little different. I mean, the corporations we work for are a little different than Monsanto. Okay, you know, we were talking last week about some of the stuff that is subsidized in America agriculturally, and it's all the stuff that goes into making the worst kinds of food. It's not beets and broccoli. It's
no,
only
there
sugar
should be
and
no
so
subsidy. There should be no
Okay.
subsidies for any food.
Okay, but you know, after the show, a lot of people said to me that's current, why don't you talk about genetically modified foods? Okay, you're right, we should talk about genetically modified foods. And again, this is a conspiracy of both parties. Obama said in 2007, we would label genetically modified foods, which, by the way, Europe has this. China labels, China, which puts
That
lead
bastion of freedom.
and puts lead in baby food, you know, or some shit like
But
that.
at least you know it's there.
Okay, but we can't have that in America. You know why? Because in America, corporations run the show. Even though 9 out of 10 Americans would like foods to at least be labeled, to at least we know they're Frankenfoods.
Why?
Okay,
Why?
they can't. Why? Because it says it would hurt sales.
No.
So shut up and eat your fucking mutant chili.
No, but
That's why. Because
if it's useful to label food, so for instance, things like fair trade coffee, if you go to Kroger, which is, you know, if not the biggest, one of the very biggest supermarket chains in America, they use a system where you can track your produce. You can use a QR scan on your smartphone,
oh,
things
for
like
God's
that.
sake, who's going to do that? Can we just put it on the label like everybody else in the world?
What I'm saying is that the market has, you know, when consumers want that information, it's provided to them. Why? I don't care about
it's
genetically
not provided.
organisms,
No, that's the point.
which have never been shown to hurt anybody.
But you have a public role here, which is to warn people. It's not a question just
What are you
consumers
warning
want.
them of?
of whatever it is involved in what's in the food. If it's genetically modified,
yeah, I'd like to know that.
I'd like to know
modified.
Listen,
wait a second. You know what? Wait a second. But here are the facts.
Whether it is and what it is,
in Europe, only 5% of the food is genetically modified. Here, it's 70%. And
what is the definition of genetically modified?
Well, here's something that didn't used to exist. They didn't used to take a gene out of a bacterium and put it in corn so that the corn grows its own insecticide.
Right.
That's right.
Now we do
Which,
that.
by the way, is good because then we use less insecticide.
Awesome. It's also delicious.
No, wait,
hold on. No. There's a great argument for it. But if I want to make a decision about whether or not to ingest that genetically modified organism, I don't want it to be kept secret from me. If the argument against it from the industry, if the argument against it from the industry is that I will hysterically, as a consumer, make a decision if I see that label not to buy that corn. Well, the solution to that is not then to make it a secret thing that I'm ingesting it, but rather to convince me that it's safe.
And just to show that we are not partisan, you know, the villain in this is Obama to me, because he first of all, he promised blatantly that he would look into this and do something, and he didn't. He also appointed, what is the guy's name? Michael Taylor. Used to be a VP at Monsanto, the seat of evil, to be the food czar, the FDA deputy commissioner of foods. And of course, Monsanto's latest Frankenfood got speedy approval because this guy is in charge of it. Because it's like putting Jerry Sandusky in charge of Chuck E. Cheese. Of course he's going to approve with speediness.
Should anything, if there is not a health risk, and there are not health risks
but there
associated
may be a health
wait. There may be. There are not known health risks that are associated with GMOs. Why shouldn't the labeling be voluntary? And then if you choose,
voluntary.
I know, voluntary in America. You've got to be nuts.
All right, let's trust the corporations to put people's health above profit, because that's what they would do.
That's not what I'm saying.
That's what corporations normally do.
My friends, the information that you are about to witness from all of my years of research is the most important. It's been hidden in plain view the entire time. This is the ultimate secret, and it's about to be exposed. I have hundreds of government documents, textbooks, white papers, where for over 80 years, the elite of the Western world have talked about adulterating food and water to sicken and sterilize the population for the purpose of eugenics. It's all covered in the book Eco Science, written by the White House science czar, John P. Holdren, where they talk about a planetary police state to carry out the forced sterilization. They also talk about covert systems in the water and food to sterilize the population. Now, this was written decades ago, before he was White House science czar. Now, suddenly, the stuff in this book is all over the news. They're selling it to the public as if it's a good thing. You see here before you what an average person would buy when they went shopping at the store. Not everything here is bad for you, but much of it has compounds and artificial chemicals that have been added that are extremely toxic and bad for your health, and they have known this the entire time, and they have approved them for use. Let's start with aspartame. You cannot go to the grocery store now and buy any type of even regular sugar gum that hasn't had aspartame added to it. In the 1970s, Searle tried to get it approved, and they couldn't. It took them 3 separate times because in their own studies with monkeys, large portions of them that were fed it died and contracted cancer. Now we have mainstream news articles, and the EU has done a major study finding lower birth weights, early birth, and yes, miscarriages from women that drink aspartame-laden soft drinks like Coke Zero. What is aspartame? It is the fecal matter of the E. coli bacteria. They took it and genetically engineered it. They can feed it toxic waste, and then it defecates aspartame. And it has so many bad health effects, it's just unspeakable. This is being done by design. It's also very, very addictive. But let's just go ahead and move away from aspartame and talk about McDonald's and chicken McNuggets. Now, I remember a decade ago or so reading health advisories claiming that a form of plastic that's used in silly putty, basically a type of silicone, was in the chicken McNuggets, but also in many other TV dinners and other foods. It is illegal in every other nation in the world to add these chemicals to the food, but it's not in the United States. The big secret is all of this was done by design by the FDA. Look at all the drugs they've approved, and then it comes out later that they knowingly approve them when these drugs are causing heart attacks and cancer. In the Nuremberg trials, it came out that the Nazis were adding sodium fluoride to the water supply in the labor camps and death camps to make the population more docile and controllable. There had been hundreds of university studies before Hitler even came to power. This is a form of forced medication. They admit that 1 part per million of sodium fluoride more than doubles the chance of bone cancer in boys and men. As the public became educated in the last few decades, the government and industry's response was to not just put it in water, but to start adding it to thousands of products like children's water that's mixed with their formula or with their cereal. They started adding as much as 900 parts per million in things like powdered eggs. It causes reductions in IQ. It increases sterility or lack of fertility, and it's being added to so many of the daily staples that we consume. We'll get back to food additives in a moment. But first, I wanted to look at genetically modified organisms. Did you know for many years the American people have been eating cloned beef and pork, and now they're expanding out into other forms of meat? Let's look at salmon first. Major university studies conclusively have proven that the type of genetically modified salmon that is actually a cross species, they've mixed other animal genes in with it, that when this fish is introduced with wild natural salmon, within 40 generations, all of the natural salmon are extinct. And the FDA approved this. And they're going to allow it to be released into the wild. That isn't even a salmon. It is a cross-species chimera. It is a mixture like something out of the island of Dr. Moreau, something out of a nightmare. More than 85% of the corn now consumed in the United States, and it's also starting to trend that way in Europe and Canada, is genetically engineered. It grows its own pesticide within the corn kernels so that insects won't eat it. If the insects can't eat this and live, what do you think is going to happen when lab rats or humans eat it? We have literally hundreds of studies showing that not just Monsanto's, but other major GMO companies' corn, and that's the majority of corn we're now eating today in the United States, has been linked to organ failure in lab animals. The studies also show massive increases in sterility in rats and guinea pigs that are fed not just GMO corn, but GMO cotton seeds. Studies in India, Germany, and the United States have conclusively shown that when they feed the cotton seeds left over from the cotton crop from these genetically modified varieties, that the cows are having miscarriages, they are having low birth weights, or in many cases, they're simply dying. And what is in most processed foods? Genetically modified cottonseed oil. Major studies are also showing that genetically engineered crops are killing honeybees and monarch butterflies. But they don't stop there. Now they claim they're coming out with a genetically engineered mosquito that's malaria-proof that they're going to release into the open biosphere. The very genetic code of the planet is being butchered in a hostile corporate takeover. Many years ago, an executive from Monsanto was quoted in National Geographic as saying that that is their program, that they want to basically have their crops and their organisms take over the entire biosphere of this planet. And the major genetic engineer companies have focused mainly on 8 major food crops. Now they're expanding out into hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other plants, literally changing the genetic code of the planet. This is a genetic dictatorship. This is genetic vandalism. And that's why the Rockefellers, the United Nations, and others have built these giant armored seed vaults all over the world, not just at the Arctic Circle. And they admit they're doing it in case all of this gets out of hand, that they'll have a type of Noah's Ark. So all these fake environmental groups, they never complain about this. They never talk about true environmental degradation. They want to put a tax on carbon dioxide that humans exhale, that plants respirate from and carry out photosynthesis with, as a way to shut down industrial society and control every facet of our lives. That's the big secret. This is a population reduction program. It is an epidemic. The sperm count has dropped in the Western world exponentially. Even the government has been predicting within another generation, almost everyone is going to be sterile. This is the globalist religion. This is their philosophy. They want the planet for themselves. The UN has said that their stated plan is an 80% population reduction. You've heard Ted Turner call us useless eaters and feeders and say that 80% of us need to be killed. You've heard Prince Philip say he wants to come back as a virus to kill the majority of the world population. Dr. Eric Pianka, Peter Singer, it's all over the news where they tell us that we should only have one child because more than one is bad for the environment and that the recession is good for lowering our carbon footprint. This is the big secret. We live in a scientific dictatorship, and the United States and England are the epicenter of this, and it's expanding worldwide. Remember all the secret testing, all the secret sterilization that went on in the United States and Europe. Remember what Hitler did. He learned all of that from the eugenicist and the Rockefeller family in the United States. This is a culture of death being pushed on you and your family. And even if you think the world is overpopulated, you need to understand that you're being targeted by this as well. Targeted by design. Recombinant bovine growth hormone in your milk, making 8-year-old girls go into puberty when they should be going into puberty at 12 or 13. Silicone in chicken McNuggets and hundreds of other processed foods. Aspartame, that is the feces of genetically engineered bacteria that has incredible health problems that have been proven. Think for yourself. It goes on and on. ABC News, this goes back 4 years ago. Viral meat spray, advancing food safety. They spray a live virus on the meat to supposedly kill the bacteria. This is a live vaccine they spray on most of the meat you're consuming that you're buying from the store. It gets even worse. The petroleum distillates, or toxic waste that's left over from petroleum refineries that refine oil into gasoline, they take these tens of millions of pounds of toxic waste that's left over, the fluoride, the mercury, the lead, and they dump it on crops as supposed fertilizer. And what do crops like tomatoes and corn and potatoes do? They pull in all of those toxins out of the ground. In fact, scientists for many years have used plants to actually detoxify areas that have been contaminated. And those plants are pulling all of this up, and then you are eating it. That's why the Washington Post reported in January of 2008 that a major study found that nearly a third of the 55 popular brand name foods and beverage products were filled with mercury. Despite the fact that the people of Europe for over 20 years have fought off all the genetically modified wheat and corn and other crops being planted in their nation, now the EU is buckled and is accepting it. The United States is literally a testing ground for all of this. It's just automatically approved. And the people that work for these corporations, they're compartmentalized. They don't know what's going on. The people that work at these stores, they have no idea what's happening. This is affecting all of us. This is hurting everyone. Many different forms of cancer are growing by thousands of percentage points. Diabetes, all these different diseases. And in major studies, it's all been linked to the toxic additives that are in our food, our water. And I haven't even had time to get into MSG. I mean, I've interviewed brain surgeons, neurologists, scientists. I mean, it just devastates the brain. It's an excitotoxin. It destroys the liver, and it is in tens of thousands of products. We can say no. We can stand up. But if you've got a neighbor giving fluoride water to their baby, please please go over and warn them. If you got a neighbor that's sitting there eating MSG-filled chips, one after the other, warn them. You've got a responsibility. If you know people that are feeding processed foods filled with GMO, warn them. And for God's sakes, don't give it to your own children. If you want to kill yourself, that's your own business. But don't hurt your children. Don't do this, ladies and gentlemen.
Genetically modified organisms, or GMOs, have been controversial since their creation. A GM organism is one that has had its genetics altered through mutation, insertion, or deletion of genes. Scientists modify these organisms for different reasons, claiming to give them more desirable traits by crossing plant genes with the genetic code of soil microbes or even other animals. GM corn, for example, is engineered to grow a deadly insecticide inside every kernel of corn, causing bugs to die when they eat that corn. Not surprisingly, numerous scientific studies have shown that these products are not safe to consume. In Europe, rats that were fed Monsanto Roundup Ready GM corn suffered severe liver and kidney damage and developed massive tumors. 50% of the males and 70% of the females died prematurely. Another study out of Australia showed that animals fed a GMO diet showed up to a 400% increase in severe stomach inflammation. GMOs are also a source of genetic pollution, and genetically engineered wheat has now been discovered contaminating commercial fields of wheat in Oregon. Both Japan and South Korea immediately halted shipments of wheat from the United States after learning about this genetic contamination, meaning that Monsanto's genetic pollution will cause enormous economic harm to U.S. farmers and U.S. exports. In the United States, there have been large grassroots campaigns across the country pushing for GMO labeling on foods so that consumers can make an informed choice at the grocery store. Around the world, the people have spoken, and they want GMOs labeled, or GMOs banned altogether. But corporations like Monsanto are spending millions of dollars lobbying at the state and federal level to influence politicians to keep GMOs legal and hidden in your foods, so that consumers have no idea they're buying them. Take matters into your own hands by shopping for organic foods, which are not allowed to be genetically modified. Look for this USDA certified organic seal on foods you buy at the grocery store to ensure that they are GMO free. And support grassroots activist organizations like Natural News, GM Watch, the Organic Consumers Association, and the Institute for Responsible Technology, all of which continue to fight for your right to know what you are eating. This is Mike Adams, the Health Ranger, with a public service announcement from naturalnews.com.